I just wanted to say just before just to let you know what we're going to be doing this morning. So welcome if you've just joined us. I think I can see a few people who I don't remember seeing last night. So welcome to our autumn retreat, to the um, take whatever arises as the path is our theme, and Padmasambhava is kind of our presiding Kalyana Mitra. And yeah, so you're welcome. And what we're going to be doing this morning is we'll have I'm going to give a talk, and then we'll have breakout rooms. So we'll go into, I can't remember how many, but a few different rooms, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about the talk and anything else we feel that we need to talk about. And I just wanted to start by saying how lovely it is to see you all. It'd be great if we could actually, you know, see each other for real. But actually, this is pretty good. So it's quite heartening just to see you all, familiar faces, and one or two unfamiliar faces, which is also lovely. But it's really lovely actually. I'm just flicking through the screens and seeing you all, seeing your faces. So um, yeah, so like I said a minute ago, the theme for the retreat is take whatever arises as the path. Um, and I wanted to tell a little story in relation to the life and liberation of Padmasambhava. Um, it's a story, it's probably the most famous story that's associated with Padmasambhava. There's a lot of stories, but this is the one that seems to epitomize who and what Padmasambhava is and what he represents. And it's the story of the establishment of Buddhism in Tibet. It's a story of Padmasambhava taking Buddhism, this tradition, from India to Tibet, sometime around the 8th century. And it's the story of the invitation by a king uh, to Padmasambhava to come. But there's a little bit more to the story than that. And I wanted to just tell the story and then say a few things about it in relation to this theme. So that's what I'm going to do for the next while. So this king's name was Trisandetson. Now, Buddhism had actually been kind of filtering into Tibet from different parts, from China and from India, different parts of India. And it had been filtering in, and this character, Trisandetson, really wanted to establish Buddhism in Tibet. He really wanted to have a firm tradition, a firm basis for not just bits and pieces, but to be a real force within Tibetan society, within Tibetan life, within Tibetan culture. And he felt that in order to achieve that, he needed to establish a monastery. He needed to establish a place of practice where a sangha could be established. And so that was his plan. Yeah, he would establish Buddhism in Tibet by building a monastery. The monastery's name is Samye, and it's in a river valley. And what he thought he would do was to invite this character called Shantarakshita. So Shantarakshita was the abbot of Nalanda. So Nalanda is an enormous kind of university. They say it was one of the first, if not the first, university in human history. So it's this place in India, northeastern India, quite close to Bodh Gaya, just a little bit north of Bodh Gaya. And you can still see the ruins of it today. It's very impressive, very big, and there was several thousand people studying there. And Shantarakshita was the abbot of that monastery. He was the abbot of Nalanda. And, Nalanda represented the pinnacle, really, of the development of Buddhism in India. It was the kind of the peak of Indian culture and Indian Buddhist culture in India. So Teresa Detson presumably thought, well, what better man for the job? And Shantarakshita was called the Bodhisattva abbot, and in texts pertaining to the story, he's very often referred to as such, the Bodhisattva abbot. But his given name, his ordained name was Shantarakshita. So, he came to Tibet. Apparently, he was delighted to be invited. The text says that his face shone white with delight and joy when he was asked. So he went to Tibet. Now, you can imagine at that time, Tibet was going from India to Tibet would have been quite undertaking. You have to cross the Himalayas, and to get into the Tibetan plateau, which is what he did. And he came to Samye Monastery, and he started to direct the construction of this monastery. So it's quite an amazing thing. This monastery, basically, the layout of the monastery reflected the layout of the cosmos according to Indian cosmology. So there was 4 main temples and the cardinal points, and then 12 smaller temples, and there was a wall around the whole thing. Quite an elaborate structure. So it's said that the king himself took an axe and cut into the ground to begin the construction of the monastery. And the Bodhisattva abbot sort of exclaimed how wonderful it is that the king's wishes have been fulfilled. There's quite a few strange episodes in this story. For example, it's said that when the king cuts into the ground, 3 different kinds of oil seep out of the ground of different colors. I think they're white, red, and gold, I think, if I remember rightly. And he interestingly, he anoints himself with the oil that arises from the ground. So he's got this plan. He started his plan. You can imagine he's very enthusiastic about seeing his vision realized. But then there's a bit of a setback. So as he's this is what the text actually says. The text in question is the life and liberation of Padmasambhava. So it said, this is what it says. Then the foundations were laid for the walls, but a naga. So a naga is like a sort of a serpent, like a dragon almost, and they're often associated with water and with earth. For the Tibetans, we'll hear about more about this tomorrow. For the Tibetans, they knew that the world was alive, and it was inhabited by all kinds of non-human beings, not just animals, but other kinds of non-human beings. So a naga was one of those kinds of non-human beings. So then when the foundations were laid for the walls, but a naga, whose abode was a rose bush with beautiful petals, knowing that in order to build, his rose bush would be cut down, resisted, and called the genies to his aid. Yakshas and Amanushas, in concert with 3 Gyanyen, destroyed by night what had been built during the day, and carried back earth and stones to their previous places. So it's quite akin, I think, this story to the story you hear about fairies and fairy trees and people quite studiously avoiding upsetting the fairies because they know that if you upset the fairies, they wreak havoc. So it's a little bit like this in Tibetan context, that this Naga, he's upset because his tree with beautiful petals, the rose bush with beautiful petals, will be cut down if the place is built. So he resists. It's like he's not being honoured. His rose bush is not being respected, and he's not going to play along. So he calls the genies to his aid. So it's almost, you get the sense that he's calling his friends, his kind of allies, all the sort of underground forces in Tibet to assist him in resisting this encroachment into his territory. So the yakshas and the amanushas, and in concert with three Gyanyen. Now I'm not exactly sure what kind of creatures these are, um, uh, but hopefully you can kind of get the impression of very powerful forces. These kind of beasts uh, that, that that are doing this work of basically undoing the work that's been done during the day. So the walls of the monastery are being built, and during the night they basically take what has been set up and they put it back where it came from. They put the stones back where it came from. Um, so it's a bit of a setback. It's a bit of a setback for Trison Detson and his plan. So the Bodhisattva abbot, Shantirakshita, and him, they have a little conflab about what to do. And what the Bodhisattva abbot advises is to call on Padmasambhava. This is what he says. Then the king said to the abbot, as a shelter for beings to come, I decided to build this monastery as best I could. Due to my great defilement or lacking your benediction, it is as though my intention cannot be carried out. So he's kind of, we can see what he thinks that maybe, again, typically kind of an ancient way of looking at it. He thinks that the reason it's not working is because he's done something bad in the past. It's his own defilement, his own confusion, which it probably is to some extent, because he's not seeing the full picture. What he's seeing is what he wants, and he's not seeing all the other beings that are involved. He's not seeing the other forces that are involved. He's just seeing what he wants, and it's not happening, and he's frustrated. So the Bodhisattva abbot says to him, Shantirakshita says to him, I have endeavored to perfect the soul of a bodhisattva. If gentleness cannot prevail, we must avail ourselves of force. At this moment, near the diamond throne of India, there presides Padmasambhava, the abbot from Udayana, learned in the 5 classes of knowledge, expert in benefactions, picking out the best, he has conquered attainment. Victor over the demons, he bends the 8 classes of spirits to his service. The genies tremble, and before him bow the hordes of funereal beings. If you invite this supreme Buddha of the 3 times, the genies will be powerless to wreak harm, and your idea will be realized. So, in a way, what Shantirakshita is saying is you need to call on a higher force here. I can do so much, but I can't do it all. You need to call on a higher force. You need to call on this character, Padmasambhava, the abbot from Udayana. Udayana is the land where Padmasambhava was born magically from a lotus flower. And it says, he's a victor over the demons. He bends the 8 classes of spirits to his service. So he's able to enlist the assistance of whatever forces are present in whatever place he is. So the genies tremble, and before him bow the hordes of funereal beings. So the funereal beings are the beings that live in the cremation grounds, which are the places that Padmasambhava frequents in order to deepen his realization of the Dharma. So that's what he advises. That's what the Bodhisattva abbot advises to Trison Detson, to invite Padmasambhava. So to invite another figure from India to come and establish the monastery. And then it says, but the king asked that he not be invited. So it's quite interesting, this. It's almost like it's almost like if it's not going to happen in the way that he wants it to happen, he doesn't want to he doesn't want it to happen anymore. He gives up. I find that really fascinating that he doesn't want him to be invited. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to. It's almost like he doesn't want to um, lose control of the way he wanted it to be by inviting this character Padmasambhava. He loses his nerve. He bottles out. Um, so yeah, then Shantarakshita basically responds to that and tells him a story. He tells him a story. First of all, he talks about the Buddha. And he said how the Buddha of the three times, all the Buddhas of the three times, past, present, and future, make a vow to save all beings. And he particularly focuses on a story of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. And this is a story that you might be familiar with. And that's the story that Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, kind of looks out over the world and he sees how careless and how thoughtless and how foolish beings are, the way that they act foolishly and heap up suffering. And he's so moved by that, he weeps. You might have heard this story. He weeps. Now, in this story, he basically wipes the two tears from his eyes and sort of throws them into the ether. And the tears are reborn as goddesses in a very, very high divine realm. If this is all a bit cosmic and weird, don't worry about it because it is. But hopefully it'll become clear what it means. Hopefully, but anyway, he throws his tears into the ether, and they're born as goddesses. Now, one of these goddesses defies the law of the gods, and she is in a way cast down into the human realm through her actions. She's reborn as a human being, and she has 4 sons, and these 4 sons do very well in business, and they build a stupa. They build like a geographical monument that expresses the sort of the nature of reality, the elements and so on, the refinement of energy and so on. So she builds the 4 sons build the stupa, and when they're building the stupa, their mother dies. So it's obviously quite a significant moment for the 4 of them, and they each make a vow, and one of them vows to become the king of Tibet. One of them vows to become the master of the Vajrayana. One of them vows to become a master of the Bodhisattva path. And there's another one who vows to serve those other 3. And what Shantarakshita says is that these 4 sons are Trisondetsan, in other words, you, the king, myself, Shantarakshita, Padmasambhava, this figure from Tibet, and this character called the Man of Ba in Yalong, Trisha. I'm not exactly sure who he is, but anyway, he seems to be a sort of a local, maybe he was a kind of a local baron or something, who also wanted this project to succeed. I didn't have time to look up who that particular character was, but the point is, he's sort of saying that I'm sorry, but you've already vowed to do this. You've already vowed to do this. You can't back out now because you've made this vow to build this monastery, to establish the Dharma in Tibet in a previous existence. So you can't back out of it because you've made a vow. So it's quite a strong thing he says, that there's a sort of a deeper, well, one can only use the word magic at work, that there's a deeper commitment that has been made. And Shantarakshita reminds him of that. He reminds Trisondetsan that he's made this commitment, he's made this vow, and that he can't back out of it. It is, as it were, kind of bigger than him, bigger than his individual, kind of egoistic willing of wanting things to go his way. So what he does is he invites Padmasambhava from India to come and to establish the monastery by enlisting the help of the local forces, the Yakshas and the Animushas and the Gyanyen and the Nagas. So that's what happens. That's the next part of the story. Is that we'll hear tonight the story of the encounter between Padmasambhava and Tristan Detsen when they first meet. We'll hear that from Sadai later on. And there's a lovely. Well, there's lots of amazing parts to the story. One part of the story is that the Nagas go from being averse and resisting to actually positively cooperating with the construction of the monastery. So Padmasambhava is able to kind of bring them on side, so that they assist the project rather than resist the project. There's that one lovely story where there's a Naga that lives in a lake, and he causes gold dust to sort of surge up from the lake, and the shore is covered with gold, and they're able to use the gold to pay for the construction of the monastery. So I just wanted to say at this point a few things about this little episode, because I think it doesn't kind of immediately, maybe it speaks to you already. So in a way, I just find all this quite fascinating, and I try and ask myself, what does it all mean? And I was thinking about this as a story that expresses the way that things happen in our lives. A little bit along the lines of what I was saying last night, is that we have a particular idea of how we want things to be in the way that Tristan Detsen did. He obviously had a genuine response to the three jewels, to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and he obviously knew that it would be beneficial for them to come and really root into Tibetan life and Tibetan culture and Tibetan society. That was all very genuine. And then he had his particular idea about how that ought to happen. Now that's the way we often approach the Dharma. We have a genuine response to it. I'm sure all of us here have had a genuine response to something. We know that it's true. We know that it's of value. It speaks to us at a deep level. And then we go about trying to enact it in our lives. And then it's almost a bit like how individualism comes in, our kind of egotism comes in. It's like, okay, I want it to happen like this way for me. And often that kind of gets in the way of that process unfolding. And I wonder if actually the Dharma life is a process of a kind of dynamic between those two forces, the force of what you could call faith, for want of a better word, a genuine response of something deep within us to the three jewels, and then the kind of chaos that creates, and all these other forces within our being that resist that, if you see what I mean. A little bit like the Nagas. So because we don't know ourselves, because we don't understand who we are, and because we don't understand the Dharma fully, all this kind of disturbance is aroused. So part of the reason I'm saying this is because I think sometimes when those disturbances are aroused, when we encounter obstacles or difficulties in our Dharma life, we think something's gone wrong because it doesn't conform with it's a little bit like Tristan Detsen. He thinks, oh, no, this is all going wrong. This is all going wrong. And it's almost like he wants to back out of it. But Shantaraksha reminds him of his vow. Now, this is a vow he's taken in a previous life. He doesn't even know about it. He doesn't know about the vow because he doesn't have that kind of perspective. He doesn't have the perspective that Shantaraksha has. He needs that. He needs him to point it out to him. He needs the Kalyana Mitra, as it were, to remind him, the spiritual friend to remind him. And isn't that the case with us sometimes, that if we're flailing, we kind of don't see a way forward? We need somebody to remind us of that response that we have that's genuine, that response that we have that's real, to the three jewels. Often we can't feel it ourselves. Often we don't have confidence in it. We need somebody else to remind us that, hang on a minute, you're really into this. Do you remember that? Um, I often forgive me for this, but I used to teach music, and sometimes I find there's useful analogies to be drawn. And the analogy here is that I would teach people. Sometimes I'd teach people to play the guitar from scratch. So someone would come in with a guitar they'd bought from a shop. They didn't know where to put their fingers. They didn't know anything. So it was quite an interesting process of taking them from that stage to being able to play a few songs. And sometimes people would come in and they'd be disheartened. They would say, I'm not getting anywhere with this. It's really, really difficult. My fingers hurt. I haven't got time, etc., etc., etc. And I'd say to them, well, look, do you remember like 6 weeks ago you came in here and you didn't even know what D was. You didn't even know what G was. Now you can play this song and this song and this song. So you've moved from there to here. Um, because you're interested in music, you like music, you love music, maybe even. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, and then they'd be willing to continue to commit to developing their musical skills. So it's a little bit like that with the Dharma, but on a much deeper level. That we sometimes we need somebody to remind us of the effort that we've made, of the commitment that we have, and that's what I think the function that Shantarakshita provides here. He is like a Kalyana Mitra. That reminds Tristan Detson what he's really about, and yeah, and in a way reassuring him that yes, this isn't what you originally thought would happen, but it's part of a broader process that's bigger than you thought it was, and And I think this is part of the dynamic that goes on in the Dharma life. I just got a little quote. This is a little aphorism by Bhante, by Sangharakshita. He says, faith is one's emotional response to something higher than oneself. And because it is higher, one cannot possibly understand it. So faith is one's emotional response to something higher than oneself. And because it is higher, one cannot possibly understand it. So there's this response that we have, and it's something really, really fundamental. It's not even to do with thought necessarily. I was thinking of it a little bit like the way we've got a pot plant. There's a cheese plant, and it just everything about the plant is just moving towards the window because the plant's very nature is to seek out light. It doesn't perfectly fit the kind of aesthetic of the room because what you see is the kind of back end of the plant. All the leaves are facing away, but that's what the plant does. The plant isn't interested in the aesthetics of the room. The plant is interested in light, and that's what or something like an infant suckling its mother's breast. It's just something really, really basic to our being that responds. But we can't know what it is at the moment. It's beyond our present ken. It's beyond our present understanding, and again, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because we're in relation to something that we can't know, at least not fully at present. And this constantly opening ourselves up to that is part of the dynamic of the Dharma life. It's an uncomfortable feeling because we want to have everything certain and everything nailed down. We want everything to use the kind of analogy of the story from Tibet. We want everything to conform to our plan. So yeah, so when we feel this, when things arise that we weren't envisaging, one of the things we need to do, and the way that Tristan Detson did, is to call on what we could call vertical Kalyana Mitra. In other words, talking to somebody who's more experienced than us, so they won't be thrown by what's throwing us. They'll have a bigger perspective, and they'll be able to help us, hopefully, to see that ourselves, to sort of in a way recast our problem in a different kind of way. I remember, I always tell the story, but forgive me if I've heard this before, but I remember years and years and years ago when I was in my early 20s, I went on this winter retreat in a place called Siddharshana Loka, which is in the bush in New Zealand. And we did a lot of meditation, and it was one of those really difficult retreats. So I was just very unhappy for the whole retreat, and it was raining and it was cold and it was damp, and it was a rough old ride. And but anyway, I got to the end of it. I persisted, and I remember talking to Jyoti, a friend of mine, an older member who was living in Wellington at the time. He'd moved there from England, very amazingly courageously moved all the way to New Zealand from England, not really knowing anybody. Anyway, he was very kind, and I was sort of saying, Nichi Jody, I've had it all wrong. I've got it all wrong this whole time, and if only I'd known how to meditate before, I wouldn't have got myself into this mess. I wouldn't have made this big mistake and been doing it wrong all the time. And he sort of said, well, it's not really like that. You know, all those meditations that you did, all that practice that you did, has enabled this understanding, this new understanding that you have after this retreat to arise. If you hadn't done the practice, this new understanding wouldn't have arisen. So rather than seeing it as a mistake, he was trying to help me to see that it was part of a bigger process, and that made a big difference to me. It made a big difference to me. So that's one of the things I think we need to do if we end up in territory that we weren't expecting, which will happen if we go into the Dharma. We will end up in places that we don't know. Terra incognito. We will end up there, and so yeah, if we when we find ourselves there, it's very important to seek out Kalyana Mitrata, to seek out a Kalyana Mitra, somebody who's more experienced, maybe not hugely more experienced, but just a wee bit more experienced, who might be able to help us negotiate the terrain. Another thing I think we can do is we can go back to the Dharma, go back to the fundamental teachings, and kind of review our understanding of it and ask ourselves again, what does this really mean? So again, one of Padmasambhava's famous sayings, we've done retreats on this before, is let these three expressions, I do not have, I do not understand, I do not know, be repeated over and over. This is the heart of my advice. In other words, going to those places in the Dharma where we don't quite understand what the Dharma is saying. And I think staying in those places is a way of growing. If we just stay with what we already know, we won't develop. But I think it's really good to sort of get a bit of to notice when we hear something, or even when we see something that we don't quite understand, that doesn't make sense to us. And rather than shying away from it, actually moving towards it. So if we see something, well, any of the three jewels really, that we don't quite understand, noticing that and moving towards it rather than moving away from it. So that's I think what Padmasambhava is getting at there. Is to look more deeply. Bhante says there are no higher teachings, only deeper realizations, something like that. So just if we just keep going back to these fundamental teachings, and they open out. Just recently, I did a course on the Metta Bhavana. I think some of you were on it actually, and we looked at the Metta Sutta, and we looked at Bhante's commentary on the Metta Sutta in a book called Living with Kindness. And I've read that book before. I've done loads of Metta Bhavanas over the years, but the whole thing seemed to open out. Just going into that text again, I noticed things that I'd never noticed before, and it meant things to me that it hadn't meant before. So I think we can do that. Is to sort of stay with those, to keep going back to the teachings and stay with those areas that we don't quite understand. Now, I just wanted to have one little caveat when I say that, and that is that if you're prone to doubt, this kind of approach can exacerbate your doubt. It can make your doubt worse. So sometimes I think if we're prone to doubt, if we're moving into areas that we don't know, it's really important to do that on the basis of what we do know. So first of all, ask yourself, okay, what do I know? What do I know? Okay, I know that it's important to be aware. I know that it's important to be kind. The 5 precepts are really important. I know that because I've practiced them and it's made a difference, and it's made a difference to people I can see. I know that it's really, really valuable to meditate. I know that it's really important to try and really be honest with my friends. These are the things that I really know. I know these from my own experience. I know these because the people that I respect say these things. And then on that basis, you can move into those areas where maybe you're less sure. So I just wanted to say that as a kind of caveat, because otherwise you can, like I say, if you're prone to doubt, it can, moving into areas that you don't know, can just get you in a bit of a pickle. Hopefully you understand what I mean. One of the great things about doing these kinds of retreats in this way is that we'll have groups afterwards. So if there's something that's not clear, you'll have a chance to discuss it. That's me letting myself off the hook for not communicating very clearly. And so yeah, so we can go back to the Dharma, and then the other thing I think we can do is we can talk about what the process that we're in with our friends. So quite often, yeah, I mean, I find myself saying this a lot, but quite often we discover what's going on in the process of communicating it. So somebody asks us how we are, and we talk about it. And in the process of talking about it, we're able to objectify it. In other words, we're able to sort of see it from the outside rather than just being all tangled up inside of it. So that can be really, really helpful. But also, one of the really other wonderful things about it is that if we're in a process of moving in uncharted territory, and we describe what that's like, and we describe how we're responding to it, maybe we say some of the things that we've learned from one of our Kalyana Mitras, other people can learn from that. You can actually learn. You don't have to, I mean, the saying is, you need to learn from your mistakes, but you can actually learn from other people's mistakes as well if you're sufficiently receptive. You don't actually have to recapitulate every mistake, as it were. You can learn by looking at other people's lives. You can also learn from other people's successes. And so I think and again, I think in a way, and maybe even the whole language of mistake is not really the right way of thinking about it, but is actually just, yeah, if you talk about what you've learned, and you've maybe talked about perspectives that you have which weren't as kind of as full or as complete as they could have been, yeah, other people can learn from that. And I personally, I find this really inspiring when I see people who are moving into unknown territory, and they're willing to do that, and they talk about their own kind of courage, I suppose, because it does require courage to do that. Um, so anyway, so that's kind of what I wanted to say. Hopefully, that's of some interest and speaks maybe to your experience. There's a lot more that can be said about this story of Padmasambhava's engagement with the building of Samye Monastery is one of these stories that you can look at it from so many different perspectives. So this is just one perspective. So in a way, what I'm saying is that it's a story that can help us to take whatever arises as the path, particularly where we end up in territory which we don't know, that might be disconcerting, that we need to remember that we are committed, that to remember to engage with the 3 jewels where they meet us in terms of vertical Kalyana Mitra path, in terms of the Dharma, the formulated Dharma, and also basically our friends in the Sangha. So that's all I was going to say this morning. So let's have a wee break. It's 20 to. Oh no, it's actually 11:42. So let's come back at 11:52, and so I see he's arranging groups for us, and hopefully by then it'll all be arranged, and we'll all just magically go into small groups, and we can talk. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening.